eviction moratorium and the Supreme Court not upholding it. And what are your thoughts on that, Sacks? Because it does relate to this never-ending free money train, no repercussions of personal behavior, and spending insanely forever. It seems like we're never going to stop with the stimmies.
Yeah, I think the Supreme Court threw out Biden's eviction moratorium as unconstitutional. Look, I think it's great. The government should not be preventing eviction, especially not the federal government. I don't understand how this is supposed to work. I mean, all you do, look, I don't want to see anybody get evicted, but the reality is you have to pay your rent. And if there are groups of people who can't pay their rent and the government decides that those people should be helped, the right way to help them is to give them the money to pay their rent, not just to tell landlords, sorry, like you can't collect rent anymore.
Congress could give more stimulus to those people.
It's a taking. It's a clear taking from landlords to say that, oh, your tenants don't have to pay you anymore. How does that make sense?
Well, how do we unwind the free money train? Because there's 10 million job openings right now that are not getting filled. And then we have unemployment starting to unwind, or the bonus unemployment starting to unwind. And then we have all this free rent concept, or just you don't have to pay your rent. At some point, it feels like we have to let the free market come back, and maybe people can't pay their rent, so they go take one of the 10 million jobs. I know that sounds cold-hearted.
No,
at some point there has to be some landing.
You've talked about this before in California. We have a labor shortage in California. We've basically run a controlled experiment in the UBI, the Universal Basic Income, where we've basically been paying people not to work, or paying them regardless of whether they work. Guess what? They don't take jobs. And so we actually have a labor shortage in California despite having high unemployment. At some point, the government's going to have to say to people like, look, COVID is not an excuse for shirking your adult responsibilities. We all have a responsibility to go to work, to pay our rent, to pay our parking tickets. And COVID has been this excuse for suspending, this sort of normal life. And the problem is COVID's going to be around forever. It's like the cold or the flu. It can't continue to be this excuse for people not working, not paying rent, not doing what they're supposed to be doing.
I think on top of that, though, I think, Jason, maybe you want to talk about this. I think on top of that, we are amplifying that by taking people's agency away. And we are...
Prop 22.
Yeah. And Prop 22 is a perfect example of that, which you should talk about. But when you put these two things together, on the one hand, you have a government that basically wants to subsidize opting out of the system. And then you have a set of laws that, if they're not unwound, reinforce that dynamic. And you put these two things together and folks just want to sit on the sidelines.
Yeah. Let's get Friedberg involved. Friedberg, you want to talk about the Prop 22 Supreme Court decision, et cetera?
Yeah, there was an appeals court. An appeals court that overturned some elements of the California Prop 22, which was a heavily lobbied California proposition, lobbied by Uber and Lyft and other businesses that have built effectively marketplaces for independent contractors, like drivers and delivery people and so on. The SEIU, which is a big employees union, had fought very hard to pass legislation in California that made it effectively very difficult for people to operate as independent contractors, and forcing companies like Uber and Lyft to treat them like full-time employees, or to treat them like employees. And so Prop 22 was to counter the union-funded legislation, which basically provided more freedom and flexibility to workers, where there weren't all these very arbitrary random rules that if you're a writer, you can be an independent contractor, but if you're a driver, you cannot. And, all this nonsense that took place because the unions were trying to increase the scale and scope of their union base. And so Prop 22 was passed in California after much spending and lobbying, and it passed by a pretty decent margin. And then this court ruling basically in the appeals court overruled the constitutionality of some elements of Prop 22, which brings into question whether that Prop 22 is actually going to hold in California. Therefore, are all these people who are drivers for Uber, delivery people for DoorDash, and all these companies that are creating like Thumbtack and, all these companies that are creating marketplaces for individuals to have flexible work, to go and work where they want, when they want, to find gigs, to find, short-term jobs, to find, tasks and projects that they can run Are they now going to be seeing that those marketplaces stop working? Because when you have to start treating those people like employees, the flexibility and freedom that those marketplaces enable stalls out and kind of, as we're already seeing. So it's super nasty. And the implications are that we're now seeing, we're now facing once again this crisis of, our basically lower income people, people that want to have flexible labor, going to be restricted from having access to gig jobs because the unions want to force everyone into a full-time job, which, as our friend Bill Gurley pointed out, is kind of like an archaic element of the 19th and 20th century. I mean, this is like
let's play
old school
a
way
clip
of work.
from Bill Gurley, and here it is.
There's one big issue that I don't think is talked about enough, which is, if you poll the drivers, they're not looking for any changes. They're really happy with the flexible work product. If you look at the voters of California, they stepped up and voted and made it very clear in a state that voted 2-1, in favor of Biden. They came down very strong, 60-40, that they didn't want this to happen. And there's one entity that's really been pushing this the whole time, going all the way back to 85, and that's the SEIU. It is a single union, but to call them a single union understates it because they are the granddaddy of special interest groups. I sent along some data, maybe you can put on the screen. They spend more money lobbying than any other organization in our country and have for many, many years. They only represent 2 million members, but oddly, those members are in hospitality, healthcare, and government services. They're not even in this industry. So they're taking the dues from their members and using it to fight these battles because they want to expand their footprint. What they're really after is putting $420, which is the minimum member union fee for the 2 million they have. They want to expand that to these drivers. So they don't actually want to help them. They want to add to their cost. But they're the one that's been pushing this the whole time.
And I think it's worth just saying one thing on this, which is, this is really kind of a question not about California and Prop 22, but it's a question about what is work and all the tech companies that are enabling a new form of work globally. People don't want to have 40-hour-a-week jobs. People don't want to have to go sit at a desk all the time. People want to have flexibility in their lives. They want to have gigs. Technology enables us to quickly find short-term jobs, short-term opportunities to work on things and make some money and figure out how we want to build our lives in a more flexible way, figure out how workers want to build lives in a more flexible way across all industries. And it's really, frankly, a non-progressive policy to say that everyone has to be pigeonholed into working, full-time, 40-hour-a-week labor jobs, be employees, and not have the flexibility of running their own business in their own way with their own time and choosing what they want to go do and work on. And so this sort of legislation and this sort of battle is a really important one for defining the future of work in the United States, which will ultimately represent the future of work globally.
And the craziness of all of this, David, is that Uber drivers, Lyft drivers, DoorDash drivers, etc., are getting paid a fortune now because there's a labor shortage, and these ride-sharing companies have given a minimum $21 an hour fee. So I don't know exactly what's going on here, but it seems to me like it's a union grab because everybody else who's affluent or rich, real estate folks, doctors, whoever, can be freelance. But if you're a rideshare driver or a freelance writer, you don't get to be. And it seems just incredibly unfair.
It is. And, one of the best things about COVID, I think for all of us, is that we learned that we could do our jobs from anywhere. We didn't have to go into an office. We didn't have to work the standard, 9 to 6 hours. We could be anywhere. We had flexibility. And I think it's one of the lasting consequences of COVID that's actually been very positive for a lot of people. And here you have the government basically trying to take away and prohibit freelance work, flexible hours, gig type jobs. These are the sort of modern, flexible working relationships that people want. Why are they getting rid of it? Because of lobbying pressure from the SEIU, which only has 2 million members. It's not even a big union, but they got Lorena Gonzalez in their back pocket. She passed AB 5 in California. The people of California didn't want it. Remember, 58% of Californians said, we don't want this. So they overturned it in this ballot initiative. And now you got this activist judge basically, inventing these specious grounds for overturning Prop 22, which is what the people want. So It's ridiculous. And, the common thread to me on this show that I've come to realize about American politics is just the degree of special interest corruption. And, people are used to thinking in terms of left versus right. It's not. There's a special interest corruption that pervades everything. You've got this union that is destroying freelance work and flexible working relationships because of corruption, because it benefits them. You got defense contractors in Afghanistan who are just looting the Pentagon and the federal budget because it's in their interest. You've got these special interests of both the right and the left. This is the central problem in American politics. And, what they do to cover up the naked self-interest is they disguise it in a kind of woke virtue signaling. So they'll start, talking about, how what they're doing is for the benefit of these drivers when the drivers don't even want it.
And to build on that, I'd say, my great realization from having this conversation with y'all every week is that we are starting to propose a nanny state in which people have no agency. Even if they want to have agency over their life and career, you are taking it away. And then if there's no repercussions to people's behavior and they have no agency, they become, disenfranchised from society. And why are they going to participate? And then what kind of society do we have if people can't make their own choices? And you see it also in, accreditation laws, and you see it where only rich people can invest. And now you're seeing it with this freelancing where, my dad would have loved to have an extra shift or two to make extra money. And he's not allowed to? 80% of drivers want flexibility.
They're willing to participate on things that ultimately, on things that they think matter, but don't necessarily solve the core root cause problems. There are people right now in America, I think, are focused too much on symptoms, meaning, they want to fight for the right hashtags. They want to fight for the right pronouns. They want to make sure that, this person gets canceled for things that happened 8 or 10 years ago. And I think what they don't understand is these are all symptoms. And this is not what solves the problem, right? We have a water crisis in America. We have a impending food crisis as we shut off the water. We have a climate crisis that's engulfing the entire nation. We're still in the middle of a pandemic that we can't control. We have an economic system that's fragile, that's dependent on a country who's sometimes our friend and sometimes our foe in China. These are huge transformational issues that we can't get organized around. And so instead, we spend our time at the edges on the symptoms. And we think the symptoms are, if we get the pronouns right, everything's going to come together and everything's going to get fixed. The looting will stop. The graft will stop. The corruption will stop. And it turns out, actually, it emboldens those people to say, hey, wait a minute, I'm tricking these people. Everything that I wanted to happen can happen. Let them focus on the pronouns while I continue to loot the American treasury for another $1 trillion. That's where we are.
Yeah, and the perfect representation of that is Gavin Newsom. He represents both of these trends. He is one of the most corrupt governors we've ever had. As soon as COVID happened, they suspended all sorts of the process for contracting so that his campaign contributors could get all these special contracts. He cut a sweetheart deal to PG&E to absolve them of liability for all the fires they've been causing. And on it goes, the $12 billion to the homeless industrial complex. And then he disguises it with all this woke virtue signaling. And so, I would just give a shout out to the recall campaign. The election is on September 14th, but the ballots have gone out. If you want to send a message to the political class that this special interest corruption has got to stop, let's cut the head off the snake here. Just vote to recall Gavin Newsom on question 1.
Period. All right. You guys want to end on Jeff Bezos